everybody. I thought when the rain started this morning we'd have quite a small turnout, but I'm amazed that everybody's made it here, so thank you very much. Claire's just mentioned my name's Lovatt. I've been working with Claire and Henrik, with other people, Sam at the back, for the last 6 months. It's been very exciting, but I'm sort of slightly glad I've now lost my job because we're finally out of the European Union. So I'll be the chair for this first session. It's called After the Brexit Election, Political Realignment and the State of Play Today. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our fantastic panel of speakers that we've got here. I'll introduce them in the order in which they're going to speak. I've asked them to prepare some kind of opening remarks, about 5 minutes in length. I'm going to be quite strict on timings, and if you hear that, it means you're just about up to your 5 minutes, speakers, okay. And then I'm going to open it up to yourselves, questions, comments, thoughts that you might have. As Claire said, this conference is as much about what you have to say and your thoughts on where we go from here than it is speakers, and that applies throughout the day. So, I mean, a couple of the things I thought we might tease out of this. I mean, I think for most of us, what was remarkable about this election, there were two things. One is the way people coalesced around the Tories as a kind of reaffirmation of that 2016 mandate. I have to say that was quite an exciting moment, that we were going to actually defeat that Remain coalition that were trying to thwart that objective. And the second thing, of course, was particularly where I come from in the northeast, but in other parts in Wales as well, that kind of breaking down of the Labour red wall and what that means. Was it something temporary? Is it just a particular moment in time? Or is this really a genuine sense of political realignment? So we'll kind of tease some of those questions out, I think. So on my far left, we have Sherelle Jacobs. She's a columnist for the Daily Telegraph newspaper, as well as being head of their online comment for the paper. On my immediate left, we've got a Labour Party Member of Parliament for Blackley and Broughton. Broughton? Blackley and Broughton. Broughton. I'll have to work on my Manchester accent, won't I? And he is the former leader of Manchester City Council. On my immediate right, Dr. Kevin Yuill, who is Associate Professor of History at the University of Sunderland and a former parliamentary candidate for the Brexit Party. And he did extraordinarily well in the election, so well done for that. Next, we have Daniel Moylan, former Deputy Chairman at Transport for London, and he is currently co-chair of Urban Design London. And then finally, last but not least, Tom Bewick, who many of you will know, an expert on post-compulsory education and training policy, as well as a former parliamentary candidate for the Brexit Party. So without any further ado, Sherelle? Yeah. Sherelle, sorry.
In terms of the question, is the realignment permanent? I would say the realignment is permanent in the sense that the dam is broken and people are no longer voting traditionally according to class, right? But I don't think that means that the Tories are by any means indestructible or untouchable. I actually think that in 5 years' time we could have another earthquake. And I think this for two main reasons. First of all, I think the left's recovery could be a lot quicker, actually, than many are assuming. Of course, it might not even be a Labour Party in that sense. It could even be a new movement. But I am sensing some actually quite interesting conversations on the left in terms of a left-wing version of populism. And I do think it's quite interesting, even with Rebecca Long-Bailey, who a lot of people think is completely the wrong candidate, is talking about progressive patriotism. I find that intriguing, right? Because that is actually swiped from Spain's Podemos, which is doing very well. And we've also seen Sinn Féin's quite stunning victory in Ireland, and it's kind of Corbynism, right? But it's a patriotic version of Corbynism. So I think that there may be something there interesting going on. And just reading some of the articles and papers on the left in terms of what this left-wing patriotism would involve. People talk about everything from George Orwell's green fields and red letterboxes to kind of Chartism and the Civil War. So they're parking almost their academic tanks on the Brexit liberation story, which I find interesting, and I think that the Tories can't sit on their laurels in that sense. So, one, the left could recover a lot quicker than people think in the next 5 years. And they could eat themselves on their identity politics stuff. We'll see. But two, I'm not sure whether the Tories are learning the right lessons from the general election, right? First of all, I think that they are completely shell-shocked. I think that they were not expecting the scale of that victory. I think there were about 3 journalists in that metropolitan bubble down in London who predicted what was going to happen. I think myself, Tom Harwood, and Janet Daly, also of the Telegraph. And the politicians were just as shocked. And I think that they feel like they have to be sort of a Labour light type movement, and emphasising, I guess, egalitarianism over aspiration. And I think that they're not being ambitious enough with this levelling up stuff. And I think that the reason why people voted Tory, not just because of Labour's implosion, was because they actually feel like they want a government that's invested in a long-term project and want real ambition for the country. And I think that that project, coming from the right's perspective, should be about preparing the country for the next industrial revolution, because we are on the brink of a convergence of infotech and biotech, and this tech-driven, amazing transformation, and ensuring that there are areas of the country which have been left behind enjoy a large proportion of those spoils. So it's about as much about investing in science clusters in Wolverhampton, Wakefield, as it is in all the transport stuff that they're talking about. And I'm not sure whether the Tories are there. There's a lot of talk, for example, about evil tech monopolies. I think that is more of a left. That's more a conversation on the left, and then the left can always be more radical, right, in terms of reforming capitalism. I think the job of the Tories, if they want to survive, right, and they don't want, a complete collapse in this huge level of support, would be to, follow through on the radicalism, the ambition of Brexit, and to embrace capitalism rather than seeking to reform it, right? Okay, my time is up. I hope I've tossed a bit of food for thought into the audience, and let's discuss it later on.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, and it's great to be amongst Brexit friends. I'm the last standing long-term Eurosceptic in the Parliamentary Labour Party. Which, given when I was first elected to be a candidate in Manchester for local council elections, you had to be Eurosceptic to get selected. So to get elected, it's an extraordinary journey we've been on. I want to say just 3 or 4 very brief things this morning. Firstly, anybody who wanted to predict the outcome of the general election just had to go canvassing as a Labour candidate. If the Tories had done that, they could have gone to the bar, basically. It was not a pleasant experience being a Labour candidate in the last general election. One can over-intellectualise it, but it was the leadership, Europe, and then some detailed issues, anti-Semitism. But the 2 big issues, which was why my party lost, were those things. The first big thing I want to say about realignment is, as long as I've been in politics, and I've now been elected as a councillor or an MP for just over 40 years, there has always been a realignment on the horizon. When I was first elected 40 years ago, it was the Liberal Party were going to be the new party of the centre. There was going to be. If you looked at what's happened since the 2015 election, is while people are voting for parties they've not voted for before, is the re-emergence of 2-party politics. That's what's happened, and I think it is pie in the sky to think that's going to change anytime soon. From my point of view, it's very difficult because one of those parties is dysfunctional at the moment, and the question is whether it can get its functionality back to make that two-party system work properly. Second point I want to make, and I couldn't agree more with what Henrik said at the beginning, I got the short straw in terms of the campaigning during the referendum. I went round universities where the audiences were not enthusiastic about leaving the European Union. I did about 60 of those meetings, and at every one of them where there was a show of hands before and a show of hands after, it went from 90% to 80% remain. But we always won the argument, because there was an extraordinary lack of knowledge, even among staff and students in universities about what. And that's not surprising, because if those students had bothered to tune into what was happening in the House of Commons, they wouldn't have found arguments based on facts or a detailed analysis of what's going on. They would have heard the most trivial cliches. I make speeches when I go through all of them, but I'll just make one of them. Nobody voted to make ourselves poorer. Well, this is from a left-wing party that in 1945 had the biggest hike in taxation ever to set up the welfare state and the National Health Service. Of course people vote, both to make themselves richer and to make themselves poorer, if that is their view of the society they want to believe. But I'm afraid, and I say there are lots of other examples that I could give, that was the state of the debate. And if we're going to both progress democratically, then we have to take on those cliches. I have to say, in the current election of the leadership of the Labour Party, with the exception of Lisa, when the issues should be as big as they can get, a lot of the debate is as small as it can get and relatively trivial as it was in the EU. The final point I want to make is that as we've extended democracy and taken back control, then that means that the agenda, I don't want to personalise it, that Dominic Cummings is following, of trying to get control of the establishment, and just in one sense that's the Treasury and the Foreign Office, who've always thought the solution to everything was either the European Union or privatisation. That, I believe, has to be the next stage in democratising our country. So it's great to be here today. Thank you.
A couple of words about what we achieved during this campaign. We defended democracy against a brutal and vicious attack. And I think really that's it. That's what we accomplished. But that is in itself unbelievable, given that I remember discussing with people in this room 3 years ago saying that there was no way that we were actually that Brexit was going to happen. They were going to stop it. And I think the people in this room, largely with other people, have provided the backbone to actually stop this. But that's basically where we're at the moment. That's all we've done, is just managed to defend democracy against these very, very powerful forces that were arraigned against it. So I think that's a good thing. So I'm going to talk about how we got here, in a sense, in a general sense, in what I see as a problem that was encapsulated by the EU, but that exists still today. And that's what I would talk about. It's a difficult thing to talk about technocracy or depoliticization. I'm not exactly sure of the word, but it's a method of government that keeps the voters at arm's length from the whole process of government. So it means decisions that are usually the responsibility of ministers or MPs are farmed out to the courts or to quasi-public bodies that either advise or implement those political decisions, or rules constraining ministerial discretion. If such institutional arrangements go hand in hand with the decline in public opposition to the policies they recommend implementing, like, for instance, austerity, then we're seeing depoliticization in action. Most Western democracies have gone down a road to serfdom, but not as predicted by Hayek, by the increasing role of experts, not as predicted by Hayek's central planning, but by the increasing role of experts in public policy. So in the 20th century, domain after domain of public life has slipped out of the realm of democratic governance and into the realm of expert oversight. Democracies are increasingly governed not by the people, not by their representatives, but by experts. We can see this process when we look at, for instance, the very, very recent decision regarding the third runway at Heathrow. Now, it's not about a discussion about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but just the fact that 3 judges can override the interests of the entire country with no discussion whatsoever. And what I find interesting is who they actually refer to. So their ultimate authority is the planet, and that's quite useful for people to be able to do that. There is simply no accountability when it comes to certain issues. It's like climate change is used by that in that way. It makes the whole issue incredibly useful to authorities who want to act without having to justify their actions. Judges base the decision on expert advice based on the May government signing of the Paris Climate Agreement, which acts, of course, for the planet. Invoking the authority of the planet strikes me as a historian it's similar to the kings invoking God as their ultimate authority, as a justification for their actions. The experts advising the government, of course, like the high priests of the past. As a historian, I would argue that this flight from accountability emerged really first on the right and not on the left. It was Mrs. Thatcher who brought up the whole climate issue very early on. She promoted to the UN in 1989 the powerful idea of the recognition of our shared inheritance of the planet. And she spoke about this precisely at the moment when anti-communism, which had been such an important justification for internal and external actions, faded. We must use science, she said, to cast a light ahead so that we can move step by step in the right direction. An even more powerful force, and one that people in this room will be familiar with, that's used to shield the government from any kind of, from the electorate, is the issue of race. Race is an inherently political issue and should be debated and should be talked about and should be argued about, and yet it's done by non-departmental public bodies, NDPBs, quasi-autonomous non-governmental organizations, quangos, we all know the lingo. All of these were established largely in the 1970s, most importantly the Commission for Racial Equality. So I've written a book about this, I'm not going to go into my book, but this first occurred during Richard Nixon's administration. So this is very much something that came from the right. So very last point, Brexit is not really done. The best we've done is sort of open up a chink of light into repoliticizing our life. We've wrested power from the biggest project for the outsourcing of our politics, the EU. And I think we just need to ensure that political decisions are debated and discussed and not simply waved away with it's the science or anybody who disagrees with this is a racist or things like that. We need to remain open-minded ourselves and open to politics, to allegiances that we might not ever considered in the past, and to compromise.
Well, Mo, thank you very much, and I'm very honoured to be here in Stockport at this conference. I'll start by, it's a cross-party event, so I'll start by saying I am a firm and unshakable member of the Conservative Party, and also when it says I was Deputy Chairman of Transport for London, that's a way of telling you that I spent about 8 years working closely with Boris, and I'm just one thing about the current government. I do think that it is actually potentially the most revolutionary government. It wants to be, in some ways, the most revolutionary government we've had for simply decades. Though I rather agree with Sherelle that ambition is not yet fully formed or established in terms of the sorts of policies that it might be pursuing. And it needs not just to take on the establishment, it really needs to have a whole new mindset, because we did not vote to take back control in order to lose interest in the subject of politics afterwards. But if you look and listen to the representatives of the establishment, the people who argued for Remain, who are so well entrenched in our institutions, the universities, the civil service, people like that, their response is truly astonishing even now. And I don't mean their response on the question of Brexit. We know that that was a determined attempt to try and ensure that Brexit never happened. They're sensible enough to accept that they've lost that battle. But their response to the upsurge of democracy which Brexit represented continues to be as purblind and as resistant as it was before. I don't hear any sign or sense of these people saying or thinking that they now need to engage with the voting public in a different way. A little bit in the Labour Party because it's being flushed out in the course of their leadership election campaign. No sense of this at all. No sense at all that they're ever going to allow another referendum to happen in this country. I think we all knew if they'd ever got their second referendum, that would have been the second and last ever. But there's no sense at all that there's a need to engage. They're still absolutely confident that they are firmly in control. And we can't accept that. We can't allow that to happen. We need change. And we could discuss a series of policy objectives that we might set for the government, and we probably will. But what I want to put out there in the few minutes remaining to me is actually a set of things we could do in relation to process, in relation to how decisions are made. Not what the decisions are, not whether we should go left or right. That's all is and should be, at least, as Tom says, the subject of politics, the subject of debate and decisions and voting, but simply how we actually reach those decisions. So we could actually have, I understand there's a Stockport Declaration, I have no idea what it says, that you're invited to sign, but there could easily be a Stockport Charter that could actually start to address a programme of legislative change people could unite around, which itself changed the way we made decisions. Here are a few ideas, and they may all be a load of rubbish. You can have your own, but we can have a debate about some of these. The first is we need to entrench the notion of referendums on major issues. Now, how we define that, how we prepare for it. Obviously, the last referendum was not well prepared for. The Irish, they have referendums on important issues, and they do prepare for them. They publish draft legislation. There's a sort of, you know a little bit more about what you're voting for, then you're less prone to that accusation that people didn't know what they were voting for. They have referendums in Switzerland. They have referendums in California. It is not inimical to democracy to have referendums. And we should entrench the notion that on major issues, however defined and however triggered, they should be the normal way of settling these things. Free speech. I really think we are coming to the point where we actually need legislative protection for free speech. And there'll be huge numbers of people who will say, oh yes, that's not a bad idea, but how can you draft legislation for free speech that still stops hate speech and things we don't like? Well, we just have to escape from that notion that you can actually have free speech and not have free speech simultaneously, and we need to consider very carefully what we should be doing about that. Then I think we should think about the local control of some national services. Here's a mad idea. What about local control of your general hospital? Why does everything about the health service have to be determined centrally? And then, even more radical, what about local funding for your local university, rather than everything coming from national bodies? And as for the judges, and this is my last one, I'll stop at this point. As for the judges, I'm not suggesting anything as radical and anti-democratic as electing them. After all, look at the United States. I mean, a practically Soviet dictatorial country, which the sign of which is that it elects its judges. So you know, it is possible to be a democracy and to elect your judges, but I'm not even suggesting that. But how about when they're appointed, the more senior ones, they might at least be invited to come and have a cup of tea in public with a parliamentary committee, just a general discussion about how they saw the law, nothing like that, nothing as vulgar as approving them or disapproving them, but some little exposure, so that we had the idea that behind this curtain of the great wisdom which is claimed for the judiciary, there are actually real people who have some sense of accountability to us. So there's the beginnings of the programme, but I think we could unite, irrespective of party, around a programme of process change. Maybe we should be discussing some of that.
Thank you, mate. Good morning, everybody, and it's great to be here in Stockport, the scene of the Plug riots in 1842. But don't worry, I'm not going to be advocating any violent action. What sort of is obsessing me is how do we sustain this bottom-up revolution for democracy? Because this time last year, we've talked already on this panel about the counter-revolution that was all the fun and games in the last Parliament, and how close we came as a country to losing not only Brexit, but actually potentially losing our democracy. That's how close we got to it. And I know this isn't a Brexit Party event today, but the call went out last February and March. People like me, then a Labour councillor in Brighton, resigned and joined the Brexit Party. People came from the left, they came from the right, they were aligned, they were non-aligned, and they were what I would call, and I think I'd call all of us in this room, a coalition of patriots came together to save our democracy and ensure that this is a country that upholds the vote when it takes place. Because we know ordinary working people fought for that vote. The suffragettes, Millicent Fawcett and others ensured that we got universal franchise in 1928. There's a line of working class struggle that goes back as far as the Chartists in the 1840s to the Levellers in the 1640s, and go back to Wat Tyler, if you like, in 1381. But the point is our democracy is a history of all of us in this room and beyond. And that's why it's so disappointing in a way to see what has happened to the modern Labour Party, and even the debate now that the three leadership contenders are having. I mean, you can put whatever labels on patriotism as you like, call it progressive, cultural, whatever. But if fundamentally, as a Labour movement, you've given up on that basic principle of democracy, that everybody's vote is equal, rich or poor, and that when we have the vote, we implement the decision. When you've given up, essentially, on the notion that it's not corporate elites, whether it's trade unions and employers in Brussels cooking up EU directives, but it should be the people here that make those decisions and share power with those managerial elites in our country. This is the fundamental challenge, I think, for the left, or certainly the regressive Labour left, that increasingly looks at politics through the prism of identitarian politics, through race and gender, but not through class. You know, I don't know whether you've, and I'd recommend you read Michael Lynn's new book. He's an American sociologist, called The New Class War. You know, and he talks about a hubs and heartland problem for left of centre progressives around the world. The problem is that a lot of leftist parties have sought to build their electoral coalitions through cities, through metropolitan, graduate-educated voters. There's nothing wrong with that. The trouble is they're solely defining themselves through those hubs, through those creative classes, through those professional and managerial classes, and not through ordinary working people in the towns, in the market towns, and in our coastal communities. So that, friends, I think is one of the biggest challenges. How do we maintain that revolution from the ground up. And just want to say a few words about the Stockport Declaration. Thank you for the name check, and also from Henry. This is, again, a bottom-up exercise that there is no identified author, there's no organisation or corporation behind it. I would encourage you to go over to the back of the room and read it. The inspiration for the Stockport Declaration is the Chartists, of course, with their 6 principles. Actually, we have 9 principles in our document. And I hope they're principles you can sign up to, because 4 of them are about why we voted for Brexit in the first place, to restore popular national sovereignty to this country. And the other 5 principles really are about good government and how we ensure strong self-government in the future. As I say, there is no identified author. We want this just to live and be out there. We plan, when the House of Commons Petitions Committee comes back into being, to post this on the House of Commons website. And I hope, Graham, we get a Westminster Hall debate and you'll be one of the cheerleaders for that kind of approach. So thank you for listening, everyone. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Just before I come out to the audience, I just want to tease out amongst you guys some of the things that we've been talking about up here. It seems to me we've been talking a lot in the press and in general about, do Labour really understand why they lost? But what struck me listening to some of the panels is, do the Tories really understand why they won? So I wouldn't mind kind of, to me, there seems to be a little bit of a tension. I mean, Boris Johnson's speech on the morning after the election, it said some really interesting things. We understand you people in the north have lent us your vote. We're not going to take that for granted. It was a brilliant speech. It could have, it was really said what we wanted to hear, I think. But certainly where I live, and certainly people I talk to in the northwest, they say I voted Tory, but I'm not a Tory. I don't feel like I am yet. So, or ever will be. But I did it for this reason. So, to me, there seems to be a tension within the Tory party in terms of we understand we have to listen. Everybody's saying we have to listen, but do they really understand why they won? So I think that's kind of one of the things. So is it just about, Sherelle, you used the term Labour light, but people reject the Labour Party. Well, not everybody, obviously. But, do they realise why people rejected the Labour Party, that it wasn't just about Brexit, and we talked about identity politics and that sort of thing. So just want to maybe tease out some of those things. First of all, Sherelle?
I think that there's a lot of policy wonks in London now who are convinced that they completely nailed it in terms of the manifesto, and that if they deliver 50 million more GP appointments and 20,000 more police by the end of for 5 years, then they'll be able to, consolidate their gains and keep on board all of these constituencies. And I really think that there is a taking for granted already of the fact that as long as they deliver Brexit, that they can be rather soggy on the, in terms of the radicalism of the domestic policy side. I think that the one, chink of light, as it were, for me right now is Dominic Cummings, because I genuinely think that he is revolutionary, and I think he definitely gets it. But I think that the Tories need to internalise the fact that there is a real appetite for ambition and for change and radicalism, and that Brexit is only the start. I think a lot of Tories feel that that is the end, and that is the problem. So let's see. It's going to be interesting.
Daniel, what do you think? You talked about it being a revolutionary government, but is it just, I do get the sense it's a kind of Dominic Cummings kind of battling away with a few people around him.
Well, I wouldn't put it in those terms, but broadly I agree with Sherelle. And I think that this is a government that I think at the top has revolutionary intent. But what it hasn't yet developed, because getting Brexit done naturally consumed. This government's only a few weeks old when you think about it. And as you say, is slightly surprised at the size of its majority. Though I personally wasn't. I thought the Labour Party, as Graham said, it was obvious on the doorstep where things were going. But I do think it needs help, if you like, with filling out that broader vision. It is very focused on delivering the manifesto. It needs to go beyond that. I agree with Sherelle. How far and exactly how, and how that has changed and developed, I'm not entirely sure. But broadly, I'm in agreement with her.
Okay.
Before we move on, can I just ask a question?
Well, actually, I'm going to come out and ask some questions now anyway. So, yeah, sure.
Particular question. When you talk about the Tories, are you talking about the particular...
Hang on, just wait for a minute. Let's get the microphone to you.
Oh, my name's Raymond.
Hi.
Are you talking about the particular MPs, Tory MPs that have voted? Are you suggesting that they don't know why they won?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
That's rather bold. I can't name any names, but I've been rather convinced and impressed by some of the Tory MPs that have been elected in the Red Wall of how they've talked and understood very well what they won and what their mandate is, and they seem quite enthusiastic to, and they're very young as well, to get on with the job.
Yeah, so I
mean, perhaps I'm being naive, or maybe you're being a bit cynical.
Okay, let's hold on to that thought. Unless you want to come back straight away, Sherelle? Or?
I mean, I do. There are some very impressive people who have been elected. I don't disagree with that. However, you know, speaking to Tory MPs as I do on a weekly basis, I do feel like there's also a divide between new MPs and MPs from other constituencies and perhaps some people in the cabinet. I do think that there is a lack of understanding of new constituencies and a lack of understanding of what the Tories need to do to ensure that it's not just transactional, it's not just about we deliver this and then you vote for us, but how you foster an emotional connection.
So you beat the beast of Bolsover and you don't know how you've done it.
The man who's beaten the beast of Bolsover doesn't even know where Bolsover is. He couldn't turn up for meetings with press. Most of his publicity photographs weren't even taken in his constituency. He's supposedly moving there, but I don't think he's moved there yet. He's already ignoring letters that people have sent to him from the constituency. So that man wants a bullet up his backside right now. And I'd like to give it to him.
Okay, we'll come back to that, I'm sure, but let's take a question over here.
Okay, my name's Mark Polden. I am a member of a Conservative Party, and you can throw things later. But I can tell you right now, there is a battle within the Conservative Party between traditionalists, particularly of the south, southeast and home counties, and those of us in the north. Our great hope is Dominic Cummings. Dominic Cummings is our ticket to the future because he gets us. He gets it that those votes are lent. He gets the fact that in order to win in the future and hold any sort of majority, then he has got to satisfy certain things in the north. I am a Red Tory. He understands Red Toryism. Basically, a Red Tory is somebody who believes in semi-traditional conservative values, values of the family, social values. Communitarianism is a good word, but who believes that there is a flaw in terms of finance and taxes. We have gone too far in terms of austerity, and it does not work. There is a flaw in what taxes can be in order for a Conservative Party to retain a majority. And under George Osborne, it went way, way too far.
But I'm really interested to know whether the panel think it's useful to use the word Tory. Now, I say that as somebody that's sort of wavered between voting Labour and Lib Dem. And when I hear that word Tory, it's always said with that kind of sneer, isn't it? It's almost like an unheard, an unwritten sneer. And I don't think that's helpful to the wider population, to the electorate, the normal people out there who have now voted Conservative. For me, I think they've voted Conservative, which is why you hear people say, I've never voted Tory. I can't believe I'm voting Tory. It's because they don't want to be associated with that word. And I really think it's unhelpful. And I think a lot of people in politics use that word, and it's quite a dismissive insult. And that's not what the general electorate voted for. I think they voted Conservative, which is why it's shocked them, and it's shocked the establishment, and it's shocked a lot of people in this room. But I don't think they voted Tory, and I don't think that word is particularly helpful in today's society. I don't know.
Thank you.
Just like
I know for a fact that the Conservative Party is saying to various constituency associations, if someone applies to be part of the Conservative Party but is a known Brexiteer, then they're not going to be allowed in. Some Conservative associations are letting people in, some aren't. What does that say about the Conservative Party at the moment?
I'm very nervous and sceptical about this idea that Dominic Cummings is our ticket to a new revolutionary or radical approach to democracy. I mean, you didn't have to watch that naff dramatisation of Benedict Cumberbatch playing him to know that the man is all about messaging, all about tactics, and it might not be technocracy as we know it in relation to what we've just lost with the European Union, but it's an attitude that treats voters like people to be messaged at, units to be organised, people to be manipulated, and it completely misses the central narrative of the revolutionary aspect of the Brexit vote that we've experienced, which is that it is not something to be manipulated in Westminster. Actually, I think Dominic Cummings is exactly what's wrong with the Tory party at the moment, which is that they think they can just manoeuvre their way out of this. And the desire is to end this back in a position of business as usual. And that's why Dominic Cummings is being portrayed as pulling the strings behind Boris Johnson. It's just the same attitude to ordinary voters dressed up in a guy with low-slung jeans and a funny hat.
I would like to see, I've been in the Brexit Party and I've been campaigning for Brexit since 1997. Jimmy Coles was referendum party and then UKIP. I would like to see an environmental policy in our manifesto, because I think the climate is changing, and I think we could do this in Britain. We don't need be a part of the European Union to do it. We can do it for Britain, for the planet, for ourselves.
Well, yeah, my experience as a Brexit Party candidate, and I am also a university lecturer, so I think there's been some interesting comments. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, when I was canvassing, people were saying, I vote Brexit. But what they meant by that was, I'm voting for a party that goes for Brexit. So I think that's why many, many people, we actually thought, oh, we're going to win. But many people were simply saying, I'm going to vote for the party that says Brexit the loudest. And that, of course, turned out to be the Tories. But I was astounded at how unreconstructed the Conservative Party was in our area. And my experience of the Conservative Party was that it was out for itself, not necessarily for Brexit. It was using Brexit as a means to actually break through this red wall. And that's what I did not like about my experience there. Just, I think on universities, I think that's a really excellent idea. And I think what we're seeing is first of all, I would say it's not a bad thing that your kids come home in tears. That sounds terrible. But I think being confronted by difficult ideas is what universities should be about. And in fact, that's actually what we're losing out of universities. And I think, I don't think it's a problem that left-wing, that I was the only Brexiteer in my university. Yes, I got a lot of abuse, but you know what? It gave a lot of my colleagues, when they actually were confronted with the ideas, were forced to actually deal with them, and were much friendlier and less insulting. If you look at Twitter, you will think that everybody is a complete bastard, and but of course that's not real life. In real life, we talk to each other and we're quite civil. And one thing that we all agreed upon in a big debate that I had at my university was free speech, which I think is one of the essential things. I really agree with the point on the panel about that.
My university-educated friends are still shocked that I've shared a platform with Nigel Farage and people from the far left and the right in this country. I think that if we're to have free speech, and I guess everybody in this room would agree with free speech, if you don't respect the people you're debating with, whether they're Conservative people, Brexit people, Lib Dems, which is more difficult sometimes. But one tries. But I think one should respect people, because if you don't respect people in that, you very quickly lose free speech, because you then start disrespecting the ideas, which is the basis of democratic debate. What has worried me about going around universities is not that sort of people have difficult ideas, it is that they're not getting ideas in some of that they are being indoctrinated, and that is leading to some profound anti-democratic attitudes. I went to a discussion, not about Brexit, but generally about democracy in Manchester University, and a young woman argued very seriously from the floor that because she, in about 15 years' time, I think she said, she was going to be 6 meters underwater as climate change arrived. Nobody over, she didn't specify, but I guess she thought old was 25, that nobody over 25 should have the vote. It should just be, and that comes directly from not respecting other people and not respecting differences of ideas. So I find that very worrying about our universities.
Hi, my name's Paul Reeves. I live in Peterborough but live near Cambridge, so that's a county of two halves, as you can imagine. My original point was quite simple, and it's been covered a bit, but inspired by Daniel talking about the revolutionary, just this expectation of revolution occurring because of what the Tory party have won. What it made me think of is of almost like what I'd call the political putty, the material that's going to do that in terms of the political, parliamentary classes, the MPs, etc. Because the raw material, we have to remember, whether it's Tory or Labour, are made up of what's occurred over the last 25 years. Is the connection with their constituents, whatever, and actually their absolute quality, as far as I'm concerned, is just totally lacking, totally poor, but the connectivity is tied in with that same thing. So if I was in either the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, I'd be reflecting, perhaps even more in the Conservative Party, reflecting how are you going to actually improve, as I say, the quality of the people that are going to be, you hope to get voted in as representatives, because the ones I see there at the moment are very unlikely to... the Tories may have won, they may have a big majority, but the quality of those people, I don't really personally believe is up to it, I guess.
So I'm interested in what the panel might have to say about the dynamics between Westminster and what is local government, because we do have a whole infrastructure outside of Westminster. If we're now having a more open debate about democracy and what politics is at the level of Westminster, just in Greater Manchester, we have 10 elected leaders of 10 local authorities and an elected metropolitan mayor, and we have these mayors in the north as well. So I'm just interested in what people have to say about how they think the dynamics is going to shift away from the Westminster bubble, and how we have this more open democratic discussion about what is the function of local government as well.
Yeah, great.
My name is John Bryan. I'm a trade unionist and I organise Leavers of Newcastle. I think one of the things that I found interesting from the election is the lack of attachment, or the increasing detachment to political parties. So the fact that in the North East, for example, people were more willing than perhaps people like Kevin in Sunderland thought to move away from Labour and actually vote for the Conservatives. And I do find the the discussion around Conservative and Labour and the political parties is a little bit of a distraction, because what we have seen is that people are more willing to shift from one to another. And I think the sorts of things in the future, in terms of a realignment, I think there are going to be more things that people can coalesce around, which will unite a whole group of people, like the people in this room. Whether that's democratic things about abolishing the House of Lords, or whether it's about free speech or whatever. But I think in terms of a realignment, I think we need to get away from the idea of this political party does this and this political party does that, and more look at the general sort of themes that unite us as human beings, that unite us as Democrats, and that we can actually begin to do something around.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to go there next.
My question for the panel. When we're talking about realignment, what it's looking like to me is that the Tory party or the Conservatives don't want any massive change. What I think is they want us to get back to normal. And what happened last year, April, May, is a lot of us that never engage politically, we just get on with our day jobs, had to get involved in what was going on because we felt, democracy as we know it is under threat. And it seems to me the politicians want everyone to go back to what they were doing before and just leave them to get on with what they're doing. And when you look at what happened on the 31st of January, I get the sense it was more of, okay, all that craziness is over. Let's go back to how things were before. And I feel we should never go back to how things were before. I think the last 1 year has shown us some major gaps and chinks in the armor. And we need to, and that's why I'm so grateful, Claire, for you and Hendrik organizing this session. We need to go back to April last year and start to fix some of the things that were revealed in the rubbish that happened last year. And I think we need to, I'm not a politician. I'd never have seen myself as a politician. I work a day job, and I can tell you a lot of people have gone back to work, and the mood on the ground, for those of us that are not engaged in politics, that are not in the media, that are not attending political meetings like this, is, oh, thank God that madness is over. Can we get on to the business of life? And I think that's very dangerous. I think I feel if more people had been engaged politically, things could have been different in this country. And last year was Brexit. What's the new huge thing that will happen? And I think where we are now is a dangerous situation. If we don't fix, it's like, I see what happened as stress testing. So a lot of gaps have been exposed, and I like the idea of referendums on major issues to get people more engaged. So how do we, beyond talking, how do we really put flesh and really start championing that so that more people get involved in political discourse?
Can I answer Elizabeth? Brexit was an arrow, and at that arrowhead, people coalesced around a target. Now, there are three pillars in this country. There's the House of Lords, the House of Commons, and the Executive. And may I make a proposition? If people can coalesce around the arrowhead of destroying the House of Lords in its current form and creating a People's Executive in the Lords as a revising chamber, which is constituted under sortition, which is effectively the jury service system, and if we can get as many people around that idea, knocking that with a big hammer, just like we did with Brexit, then we are starting to make a difference.
Hi, my name is Stephen Crosby. I'm the Deputy Chairman of the Democrats and Veterans Direct Democracy Party. Our party is based on direct democracy. We believe that is our unique selling point. And it is binding referendums with supermajorities. We're committed to localism in all aspects. And we're forming a direct democracy alliance throughout the country with independent candidates. Now, we as a party have already, in the very short time that we have been formed, we have got councillors elected in Barnsley. We were behind the 3 of the top 4 Brexit Party campaigns, coming second in 2 of them, and 1 in Wales as well. So we know how to campaign. with first past the post. And we are very much committed to Brexit. The whole Brexit issue, one of the reasons why we wanted to leave the EU was we didn't believe in this one-size-fits-all. We don't want to have a one-size-fits-all centralised government in Westminster. And that's why we want to see more power devolved down to county councils. We would like to see parish councils spread throughout the whole country. We believe that that is giving the individual electorate a say, a continuous accountability of elected representatives.
Hi, I'm David Axe, and I stood as a Brexit Party candidate in London. And I stood on the platform of changing politics for good. And I really would like to echo the comments in that regard about abolishing the House of Lords. I'd be very interested on the panel's views on abolishing the House of Lords. So we've achieved a partial victory in wresting back control from the unaccountable power of the European Union. And now surely it's time to change politics for good by wresting authority from the unaccountable and unelected 800 plus peers. And I have got an issue with the Conservative Party in that regard. You know, why, if we've achieved a victory in restoring sovereignty from the European Union, are we giving more power to even more unaccountable, unelected peers in the House of Lords? Why are we doing that? I'd really like an answer to that question. Let's get on with changing politics for good.
Right. My name is Frank Furedi. I'm a professor of sociology in a real university. So I know what it's like in terms of what people have been talking about. And the reason why I'm very excited to be here is because although we managed to have a major triumph, I do feel that we're living on borrowed time. I don't think that time is on our side, and I think the reason for that has got to do with the fact that 50% of young people go to universities, and when they arrive at a university, they hear the same script, and the narrative that they're bombarded with are things like free speech is not a big deal, democracy is a little bit overrated. The kind of messages that they get are things like being a patriot is really a turn-off. You know, anybody who's patriotic has got to be out of touch, archaic, out-of-date individual. And to make matters worse, by the time they arrive at university, a lot of these ideas have been internalized by them because the school system, the way that our schools work at the moment, the way that teachers' training works, is basically in an extremely soft, totalitarian way. They talk about diversity all the time. We believe in diversity, but when it comes to views, there's only one view. There's only one outlook that's allowed. And the reason why this is important is because if the young generations have been socialized into this way of thinking, as they're growing up, as they're kind of making their way in the political world, they're going to be influenced by the other side. And I think that it's quite important. I look around this audience, and I don't feel as old as I should, because there aren't enough young people here. I do think that our priority has got to be to literally wage an intellectual, cultural crusade amongst the young. And we've got to do that a number of ways, even with our own children. A lot of parents I talk to make the point, well, I'm losing my daughter or my son. They're believing in different things when they go to university, and they just kind of give up on that. We've got to influence our children, but more importantly, we've got to take schools more seriously. Education is absolutely key. It's the foundation on which democracy is built on. And we basically have got to take the universities on. I mean, that's not something that we can leave to professors and to academics. This is something that we, in our society, have got to take very seriously. Thank you.
I absolutely accept the point that Frank has just made about making sure that youth are exposed to this sort of thing, which is precisely why I brought my son here. You're very welcome to introduce yourself to him later. I'd like to support the analysis that was made right at the outset by Graham Stringer, that the past two general elections are essentially a re-establishment of two-party politics. And I say that as a Green Party member and supporter and somebody who ran the Green Leaves outfit for the past 4 years. Labour has, I think, from what Graham was saying, it only has to do two things to regain power. It has to re-establish its leadership, both in thought and in deed, and it has to reconnect with that 1 million voters, including yours truly, that defected from the Labour Party in 2017 to the Conservatives in 2019, largely working class voters. We know the sort of type, people who are going to be in the red wall and who supported Leave. And that simple thing, just simply saying it, makes you realise just what difficulty Labour is in, because it is impossible. Labour will not recant. It will not reconnect with Leave. It has lost virtually, I mean, Graham said it, virtually all of the advocates of that view within the Parliamentary Labour Party. When you think about the record of people like Yvette Cooper, David Lammy, Hilary Benn and Ed Miliband, you realise just how hard it is for the Labour Party to do the right thing, simple as that might be.
Hi there, I'm Jill. I'm just an ordinary lass from Cotswolds originally, but now from sunny Sheffield across the Pennines. And I've just got involved in politics because I really wanted to just leave the European Union. I've never been in politics in my life. I'm just an ordinary teacher. But it's something that means a lot to me. And my question is really for the panel, particularly Sherelle, Graham and Daniel, is what is Boris up to? Is he actually a Brexiteer? Is he actually a Brexiteer? Is he just wanting to get it over and done with so that he can move on to his 10 years as Prime Minister? What is he actually thinking? That's just my question, please.
Can you pass it on to this lady here? Yes, sir.
The reason the Red Wall fell was obviously something to do with economics, but there was big social and cultural issues that neither party's been able to speak to those electorates about. Labour's just got rid of the type of MPs, or they're no longer in it. Frank Field, Kate Hoey, John Mann, who could speak to Red Wall constituencies. Likewise with the Conservatives, if you look at Philip Davis, who's got a big majority, and you look at his views, if you look at how they express themselves, that's how you're going to retain the Red Wall, by absorbing those type of views. So there's a threat and opportunity for both parties there. And just on another issue, Boris's and the Tories' current obsession, and Labour will go along with it, of net zero carbon by 2050, and the absolute insanity in terms of economics on a science that's still not been proven is absolutely barking mad, and it will do for both parties.
I'm Dr. Anna Bailey. I was a Brexit Party MEP candidate, and I'm a political scientist. So I'm a trained academic who's made a conscious decision not to work in academia, precisely because of the atmosphere that everyone here is well familiar with. So in a way, I'm part of the problem of the political bias in academia, that people like me are self-selecting and making a decision that they don't want to work in that kind of environment. But perhaps to bring us back to the start, I wanted to really make a point about political realignment, because that's the title of the session, and I think we've touched on it at various points, but we haven't really explicitly addressed what's going on. So in terms of what we're realigning from, you had the traditional left-right, where left was in favour of controlling markets, perhaps even nationalising them, and redistribution of wealth, and then you had the right who thought that redistribution of wealth was either morally wrong or had bad practical consequences, and who believed that free markets were the best way of running things. In terms of what we're realigning to, I think you've got three dimensions that are sort of broadly overlapping. So firstly, you've got belief in the importance of community on the one hand, versus this sort of atomistic liberalism that believes we're all individuals and community isn't important on the other hand. Second dimension is the identity politics. So on our side of things, you've got patriotism or a kind of civic nationalism on the one hand, and then you've got the sort of pro-Europeanism or cosmopolitanism on the other hand. And then the third dimension, which Kevin talked about a lot and which Daniel also talked about, the democracy on our side of things, and on the other side of things, the technocracy, leaving policy making to the experts. Now, in terms of what next, so how we should proceed, obviously identity politics is quite difficult to undermine, so that's a big obstacle, but I think what we really need to push is the importance of democracy and the evils of technocracy, and I think in terms of appealing to the next generation, that's the way ahead.
Right, panel, your mission, sum up in 1 minute each.
I think, listen, first thing to say, some fantastic contributions. I'm starting to think... First thing to say, some fantastic contributions. Thank you, everyone. I'm starting to think, actually, there's something in Richard Bergen's idea of a Tony Benn School of Political Education, you know, because there were just some fantastic contributions there. Although, arguably, I suppose if Keir Starmer wins, he'll want to set up the Hilary Benn School of Political Education. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how those two get on. Look, I just want to reflect on this thing about, you know, do the Tories know why they won? Look, we've had 120 years of the Labour Party. It's been in office for 30 years. There is a reason why, actually, the Conservatives are the most successful political party in the Western world. They're chameleon-like when they need to be. It was obvious post the referendum that the political pulse of the country was moving towards being economically more radical, but socially more conservative. It doesn't take a genius to work out that that's the bandwagon, effectively, that Dominic Cummings and others jumped on with their messaging. I agree with everything Eloise actually said about that. Personally, he frightens the hell out of me, Dominic Cummings. I mean, you read his blogs, it's a very cold, it's a very kind of utilitarian view of the world. So that's my point. Right.
Well, obviously there's some very harsh and challenging things said about the Conservative Party. So not in a partisan spirit, but simply because I think this is important, I'll just try and respond very quickly to a couple of them. The first is, yes, Boris is definitely totally committed to being a Brexiteer. There is this thing, the point Sherelle made. What is the bigger vision? There needs to be work done on that. I absolutely agree, and that has to be got right. Transactionally delivering better public services is not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. The second thing is, I profoundly agree with Graham and the other people who said that we have a two-party system and it has reasserted itself. And that's demonstrable. And I think that is partly because the voters recognise that in order to exercise power in a first-past-the-post system, that's where you end up. And that's why I think Labour Party voters, recognising this, actually voted Conservative. They didn't vote Brexit Party, I'm afraid. They voted Conservative. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad, this is not to encourage you to join the Conservative Party. I'm not trying to do, not being partisan. Whether that's good or bad, you have to recognise that the vehicle for change has to be the Conservative Party, or potentially one day a reformed Labour Party. That's very hard to imagine what that would look like in a way that would meet this audience. So I think that getting the ideas and campaigning for and around ideas about changes to the decision-making process and greater democracy with a view to influencing what's going on inside the major political parties is really what we have to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, lots of very, very good contributions. I think, from my perspective, going out and campaigning, I knocked on about 1,000 doors across Sunderland. And what I found fascinating was the level of engagement. I thought the engagement was the most impressive part. It's the thing that actually attracted me to politics. I was knocking on doors where people were saying, nobody has ever come to my door, and I've lived here 33 years. And I think that's, when you're talking to people like that, can the two-party system survive that engagement? That's the interesting kind of aspect for me, and I'm not sure it can. I think it will face profound challenges because it's built so much on an anti-democratic turnover kind of thing, particularly in the Northeast. Come up there if you don't believe me. So I think this is a really exciting political time. Does the knocking on the door mean you really support what I'm saying, or just had to wonder about that? But yes, I think there's a few things we can talk about. Free speech, people have talked about. Political accountability. I think anybody who governs must be recallable. We must be able to bring them back. And finally, the people should be the ultimate authority above Parliament if there's a particular contest. And I haven't read through this manifesto, but if it says that, I'm very happy.
Thank you.
That's a great point to follow on from. I mean, we've had a tremendous victory over an arrogant and often trivial establishment in Parliament and the civil service and elsewhere in our universities in basically saving the form of democracy that was decided in this country at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and sort of it's unusual in politics in as much as it was an abstract idea. It wasn't about whether I'm going to have more money in my purse and wallet at the end of this than I had at the beginning of it. It was saying we want our rights to determine the future of this country. It is very difficult then to say that that will stop politics being what politics is, which is often about who gets what. I believe in redistribution of wealth. Some people in this room won't believe in that. We have to debate it, and we've saved that position. We can't take politics out of politics. It's very difficult to focus that victory on something else. Final point I would make, because it's been asked a number of times, is what's Boris up to? Boris knows exactly why he won the election, because the opposition was rubbish. To him. He understands that, Conservative MPs understand that. He doesn't understand how he's going to win the next election. That's what he's focused on. And that is politics as it's always going to be while we have democracy. Politicians trying to do their best, understand what's being said and representing them. And the real triumph is if the rascals get in, what we have saved from the referendum and the general election for Brexit is you can throw the rascals out.
Okay, someone asked whether it's back to normal, and I think that the Tories hope that they can be just revolutionary enough, toss some red meat in terms of Brexit, in terms of the BBC, perhaps the licence fee, but what there is lacking is the fundamental underlying systems change ideology, right, which goes from everything from localism to taking on Whitehall. And I think that very interesting question is Boris a real Brexiteer? He is, in the sense he's not a Remainer, but I don't think he's an ardent Brexiteer in the same way he's an ardent Green zealot, frankly. And I think that could be sort of the next big dividing line. And I think there is a danger, actually, that the Green stuff could actually destroy Boris in the same way that Iraq destroyed Tony Blair. So that's TV, one to watch, actually. But ultimately, I think the genie is out of the bottle now, and I think that the Tories will need to understand, and Labour will need to understand, that gone are the days where you can have unaccountable ruling elite, basically governing from the top down. It's all about, dissent from the orthodoxy, bottom-up disruption, and, let's see which side grasps that first, because I think the side that grasps that first is the side that's actually going to do best in the next election, which I don't think. There are a lot of people in London saying that that the next election is the Tories because it's going to take Labour too long. But I wouldn't take that for granted.
Thank you. Can we give everybody a round of applause? 10-minute comfort break, and then we're all back in here again for the next session with Frank Frady and Maurice Glassman. 10 minutes back here.